Hello guys, my name's Daniel and in this video I'll show you how to set up your Nikon D7500 for shooting HDR photos. And not only that, I will show you how to save these settings so that you can quick access them when you have saved them on one of the user setting banks. It's the U1 and U2 setting bank over here. And so you can quick change between your normal shooting mode like MAS or P back to the HDR settings and vice versa. Let's have a look at it. So let's have a look at the camera on how to configure the Nikon D7500 for HDR. First, we turn this thing on. Who would have thought of that? And the first thing we do now is to make sure that our camera is in the A mode here on the mode dial. We will stay in the A mode for a while and we'll make all our changes to the camera settings in this mode. So first thing we do, we should adjust the aperture. And I'm always using an aperture of f8 for HDR, and I vary in the aperture from 2 steps, minus or plus 8. So normally f8 is a good compromise between having a sharp image and having a short time for the photograph. The next thing we have a look at is ISO. Less is better, more is bad. So depending on how you're shooting, you can enter, for example, an ISO of 100 when you're shooting with a tripod, for example, or when you are shooting freehand, then I'm using a 400 ISO, so that I don't need much time for the camera, so that the image isn't getting corrupted by motion. Let's say we use 100 here. The next thing we do is configuring our bracketing row. This means we are telling the camera to not only take one photo, but to take 5 photos with different steps of how much light is in the image. So we use the BKT button on the side, we push it, and then we can change the number of steps we want to shoot. And I want to shoot 5 images for one HDR later, with a 1.0 step size. So we'll enter 5F 1.0 here, and after that we don't need to hold the bracketing button any longer. So this was everything we need to set up on the camera itself, and now we go to the menu. The first settings we change now are inside the photo shooting menu. It's the menu with the camera icon over here. In that camera shooting menu, I always change for HDR the storage folder to, for example, HDR75, so that I know inside of that folder there are only HDR photos, which I won't use for normal RAW editing. And of me personally, I like having the HDR files named different than the normal photos. So this is why I say, okay, shoot it with inside the HDR75 folder, and give the files the prefix HDR. So the next thing we can enter is the flash control. We don't need it, I set it to TTL. We are not shooting HDR images with flash. So for the image area we say DX, so that we use the whole sensor. Image quality makes sense to use RAW. By that we also say that we use the image size L. For the RAW recording itself, we use compression, but we do it lossless, so that no information on the image is lost. ISO sensitivity settings, auto ISO sensitivity control is off, so that the camera won't change ISO settings during our bracketing row. That would be a big problem. And the ISO sensitivity is 100 here. We want to do this manually. And that's the same thing about white balance. I always use cloudy because it gives us the most neutral image on the display for controlling the image after we took it. The same with picture control. I always use neutral, not only with HDR shootings, but also when it comes to RAW. I want to change everything later on the PC. And I want to be in control and not the camera. The same is with The same is with active delighting. I don't want the camera to think and I don't want the camera to change the contents of the image. The same is with long exposure noise reduction. We don't need it. We are at the moment photographing with low ISO 100, and even with 400 we don't need it. High ISO noise reduction, we say shut it off. And the same with vignette control. No, I do that later on the PC. Flicker reduction is also off. Perfect. And the auto bracketing set is set to AE only, not flash bracketing. We don't use flash here. Of course, at that point, multiple exposure is turned off, HDR is turned off. That's a little bit strange, but the HDR function named here is not the HDR we want to have later. We want to combine 5 shots to 1 HDR. If we would activate that here, then the camera would develop an HDR all by itself, and that's not what we want to do, because maybe it's doing it wrong. So we have more options later if we turn it off. So that was everything in the photo shooting menu. Now we go here to the so-called custom settings menu, and there we have different functions ranging from autofocus to movie. Everything in this menu is standard default setting from the camera. I will only show you the things that I've changed or things that are important, even though they are default. So if you want to make sure everything is set up completely, then go and reset your custom settings so you have it reset to camera defaults. The first group here is autofocus. We don't need it because we are not shooting HDR images later with autofocus. We are later completely turning off everything related to autofocus and setting everything to manual as we are focusing manually and don't want the camera to change the focus between the different HDR shots. That would be a problem. So the first menu we have to have a look at here is C, timers and AE lock. And inside the timers AE lock, I often go to the C3 menu for self-timer. That's especially important when you're shooting your HDR photos from a tripod. So I'm using the self-timer then, so I make sure that I'm in the self-timer mode here, and I'm having a delay of 2 seconds, meaning I mount the camera on a tripod, I press the shutter here, and from then on it counts 2 seconds until it makes the first image. That is important so that there are no movements from my pushing of the button here. I do a number of shots, 5. You've heard that number before. It's in our bracketing row, and of course I want to shoot the whole bracketing row by self-timer. Yes, and the next thing is interval between shoots. I always use 2 seconds because when I've mounted the camera to a tripod, then I have enough time, and I don't want that the tripod is moving due to the last shutter from the mirror. So yes, that was self-timer in the C3 menu. So let's have a look at the D settings. In that menu we can find D3, exposure delay mode, and this makes sense to use it when you're shooting on a tripod. I set it to 2 seconds. It is also reducing movement in tripod or camera so that your image gets blurred. The next thing you can use is D4, electronic front curtain shutter. It also helps reducing blurring of the image and making it unsharp when there are movements from the shutter. You can use it. Make sure you use it with with only high quality lenses. I mostly turn it off. It's not that big thing of an advantage. Yeah, that's everything in the D menu. Now let us go to the E menu, and there we have the point E5, which says bracketing order. This is a setting which is in the camera by default, and it says it takes a normal image first, then it takes everything which is very every low part of the image, then it takes a very light image full of light, meaning that at the end of the shooting row, at the bracketing row, the images take more time to be taken. Yeah, and that was everything in the menu, custom setting menu. So now we have all the settings in our camera, and now we want to save them so that we can fast access them. For that, we go to the setup menu and we go to the point save user setting. Now we can say save it to U1 or U2, meaning we put these settings we just made to these mode dial entries U1 or U2. For example, we take U1, we save the settings, yes, and now there's a great thing. After we have shut down our camera, for example, and let's say normally we are taking photos in the M mode manually, so you can notice that even if you don't use a bracketing row in M mode, for example, like here, or if you are shooting with ISO 1000 in M mode and you're using a very low aperture, for example f.28 in M mode, that's how you normally make photos, and now you're spotting a subject which you want to photograph in HDR, then you can go take the mode dial here, switch to U1, which we just saved, and you will notice everything is restored back to the settings we made before. You have the aperture here, you have the ISO setting back to 100, and when you press the bracketing button, then you are switched back to 5f 1.0, which is perfect for HDR. And so also everything in the photo shooting menu is still on the values we've set it to before in HDR 7.5. So now you're ready to make photos, either way by self-timer, for example, if you are mounting the camera on the tripod, or you can go to quick shooting QC, and then you can take a few photos in just by holding the camera in the hand. So from now on you're having your settings for HDR on the dial U1. I hope this helped you. So that's it. If you don't like the video, then you can also find a link to my website where I have made all the settings available as a text manual on how to set up the D7500 for HDR shootings. So I'd be happy if you leave me a subscription, and have a nice day.